Shelby County Schools presents Budget Talks.
Hi, and welcome to Budget Talks, a series of conversations featuring Shelby County School Board members and district leaders to discuss the 2018-2019 school year budget. This Budget Talk segment features School Board member Chris Caldwell and then our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Lynn Johnson. Thank you both for being here with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You are regulars of our station, but even more during this budget process because we want to ensure that our community and our audience are fully informed of everything that's pertaining to the budget since it's such an important process in our district. So I want to just use this segment a little bit around framing because I know there's a lot of conversation about our funding structure, how do we compare to other districts across the state and maybe even across the nation. But my first question was a little bit more around challenges. I know some of the challenges that we face as a district are kind of like cyclical. They happen, year after year. So Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to start with you because you've been in the board for a little bit of time. You've been an involved parent for a number of years, and you've seen these challenges that continue to recur. Talk to me a little bit what those are.
So most districts in Tennessee are funded the same way. We get part of our budget, a big substantial part of the budget from the state, and the other part, almost half here in Shelby County, from our county commission. But one of the things that you might hear conversation in our community that that the amount of money each student gets in the different districts around our county are very similar. And why is there a disparity in the ability to push and move academic achievement? Well, in our district, for instance, 60% of our children are economically disadvantaged, and that equates to about 65,000 students. So if you look at the size and the enormity of the number of children that have needs, more needs than other children, that's the size of Knox County's entire district. And we also have 40,000 students of those economically disadvantaged that live below $10,000 a year in family income. So that equates to about 44,000 students. That's the size of Hamilton County. So it really impacts how far the money can go and where you spend it if you have such a large population that is economically disadvantaged or comes to school without the background and the upbringing that allows them to succeed, and things like being able to have a broad vocabulary by the time they come to school. Sometimes kids that come from economically disadvantaged homes are hundreds of thousands of words behind other students that may come from an environment that allows them access to things that poverty doesn't allow other students and families to have. And
that's where that equity piece is so important, because you're not just addressing the needs of the entire district, but to exactly the point you're addressing is the fact that you have to meet the students where they are and then provide that additional support through the funds that you receive, which is a great segue into my question to Chief Johnson around funding. I know our funding for our district comes from multiple sources, and I know there's probably a very long formula and explanation, yes. But Chief Johnson, could you give us a high-level overview of what are those different funding sources and how do those get determined of how they get allocated?
Yes. So you can really think about our funding sources in four pieces. One is a large bucket of funding that we receive is from the state, and it's usually through a state formula called the BEP, or Basic Education Program. That amounts, in terms of our general fund, of about 42%. Another 42% is related to our state funds that we get, our county funds that we get. And we receive property tax, will tax, sales tax within our county as well. There's another portion that lives within our general fund as well, related to federal funds, but also lives outside of our main operating fund, which we call the general fund. That portion really is meant for a number of things. So most of how we feed our students in terms of breakfast and lunch is from federal funds, in terms of funds we receive from USDA. But we also receive funds to address some of the unique needs of our kids as well, federal funds, whether it relates to Title I for kids who are economically disadvantaged, or IDA for kids who may have a disability, or even kids who are English is not their native language, we receive Title III funding. And then the last is that we receive philanthropic funds from a lot of our community partners and foundations as well, to contribute to our mission and our support.
So thank you. That's very good context, and I think it's also good because Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned how we compare, and the fact that some of our needs are actually the size of some of the other districts within our state. As far as funding goes, how do we stack up with other similar districts that may have similar populations or that are similar in size? Mr. Johnson, that might be a question for you.
Sure. So when we look across the state, there are very few, if any, district that compares to the level of need that we have. So when we think about the number of kids that we have who are economically disadvantaged, that surpasses a number of districts. I mean, you could almost compare Hamilton School District with our economically disadvantaged. It's probably 1 for 1. The second part of that is when we think about the additional funds that we receive is really towards addressing those unique needs. So while we may receive additional funding, our need is also greater than not only school districts within Shelby County, but even across the state. And when we even compare it nationally, one comparison would be looking at Detroit. Detroit receives about $2,000 per pupil than we do with the same number of economically disadvantaged students.
So that's where that inequity comes into play, and that's some of those things that you were addressing through the student-based budgeting process that you actually rolled out earlier this year. Mr. Caldwell, though, because of the need that we have in our county, I know that you and your fellow board members and some of your other community members then play a very important role in advocating at the state level and through the other funding sources around ensuring that they see that there's a greater need and they're able to really support the district the way we need to, so we can translate that into success for our students. Can you describe what that looks like?
Well, I think what poverty causes is a lot of other factors that you have to address, and most of those may be outside of the school district in terms of the community and the families. So it's important that we collaborate with community partners that do that work, and that helps us some, but that's not all the work. And for instance, the state has suggested to school boards that they go to the student-based budgeting that you mentioned, where each need counts as an extra factor or more money for a student. So that's what we're moving to, and that helps. But we're almost being set up for failure because the way we are funded from the state is based on an outdated staffing formula that does not align with addressing students' needs. It addresses more the number of students and does not take into account the special needs that they may have. So, what I would love to see is for the state to distribute the basic education program money based on need, which would mean a lot more resources would come to Shelby County and really in other districts that have more needs than some other ones. So it would be really starting to do what we're doing, is focusing on the needs of the children in the district and realizing they're diverse and different, and trying to make sure that we get adequate funding, because we cannot reach the children if we don't have the resources to address their needs.
So thank you, Mr. Caldwell. That's really good context. And my last question was mostly around a great need that we have in our district, which is around capital, meaning facilities, maintenance, anything that we do to support the buildings and the schools that our children attend. We're going to have Board Member Orgel coming in one of our segments to talk about much more in depth, but I know that's something that you also hear a lot from your parents and the community. Tell me a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, when I first got on the board, it had been several years before the county commission had appropriated capital improvement funds for our district. So that's the money that builds new schools, but also addresses the deferred maintenance. So we have close to $500 million in deferred maintenance. And what we found is that if you neglect deferred maintenance, then it accelerates the deterioration within the building, somewhere between 15 and 25%, depending on what type of deficiency needs to be addressed. And we cannot do that out of general fund money. We can, but that's what capital improvement funds from the county are supposed to address. So the fact that we went for years without that has put us in the situation we're in today. And fortunately, it's improved some. And I think Lynn could probably talk to you more about this year's capital request and what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Lynn, can you just briefly touch on that?
Sure. So there'll be two components to our capital request. One, there's two 21st century designs that the school district is working on and we're excited about in terms of providing a better learning environment for our kids. I think the second is related to deferred maintenance, to make sure that we're chomping away at our deferred maintenance. When we think about our school buildings, at least 140 of our school buildings are over the age of 40 years old. So it's important that we continue to address the deferred maintenance, HVACs, window repairs, roof repairs, the bare minimum as well.
Okay, well, thank you both for your time. I know we're going to be talking much more around capital and facilities needs in one of our next segments, so I certainly appreciate you both taking the time and giving us more information around funding and all these other nuances of the budget process. So thank you again for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
And thank you for watching today's Budget Talk. To watch the full series, visit thevoiceofscs.com.